Hey, Matt.
Hello, how you doing?
Good.
Good.
Hey, good work. I feel like it's all set.
Oh, you do? Okay, good.
Yeah, I didn't
All
have
right.
anything to reply. Just it was
All right, I did something for every SUNY learning objective, and all but like one I couldn't really find a way to fit in.
sounds good.
All right, thanks.
Yep. Hey, everyone.
Hey.
How's it
Hello.
going?
Hi.
I'm sensing some like, yes, we're in our last week excitement.
Yeah, that's the only thing getting me through like all the work I have to get done before it's over.
Right.
That it's almost done.
Yes. One assignment at a time. So I guess while we're waiting, some exciting things. Somebody reached out to me in an email last week when I was kind of intrigued. So how many of you guys have dogs that you give a Bravecto, not a Bravecto, but a Seresto collar, you know, the tick collars? They're like gray rubber with a chemical on them.
Yeah, we do on our dog.
Yeah. So depending on like where you order them from, you know, how sometimes there's knockoffs, and there's been something in the news recently that, you know, if you buy them elsewhere besides certain distributors around here, they can be a little bit dangerous. Now I have a Seresto on my dog. I got it at PetSmart because we have so many ticks. It's like not worth him getting Lyme and stuff. So anyways, someone reached out from Queensbury last week asking about testing ticks and testing chemicals on ticks. And so the guy called me today, I think he's in his 80s. And I asked him if he was a chemist by training, and he said no, he like reaches out to, you know, people that do these sorts of things. But anyway, so he is looking for somebody to collect ticks for him and test these essential oils and see if they serve as repellents. Because what he's really hoping to do is to and I guess he's got them, the chemical, those essential oils like cedar and stuff. He's got it kind of melted down and polymerized, and they're in like a pellet form. So I'd be collecting ticks and putting them in jars and exposing them to different scents, different essential oils to see if they repel or attract. His idea would be that he'd be able to put it on a collar, like a regular collar, so you wouldn't have to expose the entire neck to it, because some dogs have irritation and loose fur, but you'd be able to kind of just attach, you know, one nubbin of this particular collar with chemical on it to repel some of the ticks. So not that I really like dealing with live ticks. It's like a step worse than the dead ones that we're already testing for Lyme. But I was intrigued, right? So, you know, maybe this summer, and if anybody's local and you find, you know, live ticks and you want to save some for me, just keep them in a jar with holes, maybe put like a screen or something or cloth so air can still pass. But let me know and I'll come get them if I end up having trouble finding them. I was intrigued by it. Anyways, last week we have our presentations going. I'm gonna put screen sharing on for you guys, and I think we're gonna lead off today with Nina. But prior to that, let me one sec. I'm in the office, so you know how it's harder for me to figure out where stuff is. I wanna just show you guys the exam area. You got my messages yesterday about that?
There's no time limit on this one, right? It's just
No. I wanted to make it as low stress as humanly possible for you guys. So there is no time limit, except that at the close of our day of the final exam, so like when our exam period is done, our exam is Thursday at 12:20, so that it's a 2-hour window. So Thursday at 2:20 would be the close of the test. So if you guys go to the bottom where all of our drop boxes are, there's a final exam right here, and it's open now. So at any point you can kind of work on it. For those who've not done a final exam that's a take home before, it is open book. It's open notes, open articles, open Kariva text. And that's one thing I want to note. If you guys are, and I put a lot of hints in this, so it might be specific, but I guide you to the PowerPoint, or I guide you to the article, or I guide you to the Kariva chapter. Now, if you remember in our syllabus, if you go to the syllabus, the day by day kind of breakout of what it is that we're doing, on the far right, I believe, where we've got the articles assigned, I also say Kariva chapter, blah, blah, right? And you'll go back and you can look at what unit that is, and you could scroll back up to the unit that might have, in the overview page, it might have a Kariva chapter, right? Where you could read it again if you needed to. So if you're wondering where all these chapters that I'm guiding you to are, most of them are going to be linked, associated with that overview. So you can go back to the syllabus, the day by day, find out when it was covered, and you can go back into the chapter overview to look at that. Okay, so that's where they are. It's a mix of a whole bunch of different types of questions. Many of them are, I had to make them essays because I wanted them to be open-ended for you to be able to write what you wanted to write. But it looks like somebody's already started. My suggestion for you guys is to, take your time with it. Do a couple every day, do a handful every day. Many of them are just kind of drop downs. You answer the question, some other drop downs, but others will be, I'm hoping, multiple choice. So they'll be easier and quicker to answer likely, but others I want you to write. We talked about the Guadalupe raccoon. If you've forgotten about it, you can take a quick listen, right? So I want you to kind of go back with some of the things that, and answer in a few sentences. I don't want you to answer in an entire essay, 1-page form, right? But you can answer in a handful of, sentences, 2 to 3 sentences. It's a final exam. I don't want you guys to, write it like you're writing a research paper. You've already shown me that. I just want you to have some connection back to the material we've covered this semester. So it is open from now until, our final exam time period window's over, which would be that 2:20 on Thursday. So again, don't wait till the very last minute. Do a handful, do the ones that are easy for you, get used to it, take a look at all the questions, and then go back and take some more time with the other ones if you need to, okay? Sound good?
So there's more than one attempt allowed on it? Just double checking?
No, it should be only one. Well, it should be open-ended, so you can go back at any time. I don't think, does it allow? Oh, geez, I didn't even think of that. I've never done it where it's open-ended like this. I'll have to go back and check. But yeah, I mean, that's what I would hope, is that you could go back at any time, that it's not going to time out. So Mina, I'll check on that and change the settings if it's locking anybody out.
It doesn't have a timer on it, so it won't time you out if you want to take a break.
Oh, perfect.
I've already checked it out.
Okay, thank you, Devin. Yeah, it's hard for me to know on this end how it's going to look to you guys sometimes. So if you run into any trouble, just let me know, all right? Okay, so I've got screen sharing on. We're in the midst of our presentations. Mina's going to lead us out on manatees today. So take it away when you're ready, Mina.
Alrighty. Can everyone see this?
Oops, no, I got to stop my share. Yep.
Oh, okay. So everyone can see this now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So the paper that I wrote was on the conservation of the American manatee. So the American manatee unfortunately faces many different types of threats to their conservation and management. And these threats mainly come from anthropogenic causes. And the threats that they present are numerous and far-ranging. And unfortunately, manatees do not really have a defense system against most of these threats. So conservationists have been working to help the manatees, and thankfully there are already conservation efforts in place, and these have really promising future implications. So this is an example of the American manatee. I personally think they're adorable. So the American manatees are K-selected species. So that means that they only have a couple of offspring within their lifetime, usually like 1 to 2. And American manatees are very large aquatic mammals. They usually weigh between 480 to 1,400 kilograms, and they live a pretty long life. Usually, if they're undisturbed, they can live between 50 to 60 years. And they're also an herbivorous species, which means they rely on vegetation and plant matter for sustenance. So this is an example of them eating this plant matter. And they are able to perform a habitat split, which means that they have the ability to migrate between fresh and saltwater environments. And their habitat distribution is spread out through a lot of the southeastern coast of the US, as well as the coasts of Central and South America. So there's just a graphical abstract of what their habitat range looks like. So just getting into some of the conservation threats that the manatee faces, the first and most prominent threat that they face are boat strikes. So boating collisions unfortunately account for a very large percentage of manatee deaths. In Florida, they account for 25 to 30% of manatee deaths. And this is due to the fact that manatees are very slow moving, lethargic creatures, and this makes them a lot more prone to being at risk for injuries that boats can pose, such as really deep cuts to their skin and abrasions. Manatees have very soft skin, like a lot of aquatic mammals. So this means that the sharp propellers and edges on boats can unfortunately really hurt them. And manatees are also really hard to spot in water because the water that they live in is usually warm tropical water. So this means that the quality of the water is usually very murky. And because manatees have algae that grows on them, this makes them hard to spot. So as you can see, if the water was very dark, that manatee would not be easy to spot. So because of the close proximity to shore, the manatees are usually in the area where most boating activity for recreation occurs, and that is the anthropogenic cause for these boat strikes. So unfortunately, boaters are not always the most mindful when they are recreating, and this is what results in the boat strikes. So in areas like Florida, boaters have been seen to not really be observing any of the like speed limits that are in the waterways of Florida, where they are supposed to have like speed limits, and this really contributes to the boat strikes because they're so hard to see and boaters are not being smart, unfortunately. So this is an example of the harms that can come to manatees. As you can see, the cuts and abrasions that the boats cause are really deep and painful for these animals. Another conservation threat that the manatees face are red tides, and red tides refer to massive algae blooms that are very toxic because of the neurotoxins that they produce. And the neurotoxins result in paralysis and also respiratory problems. So these algae are able to be transported through the ocean by the ocean's natural tides and currents. And this unfortunately makes red tides a widespread and not isolated problem. And these red tides are very common in warm waterways, such as the Florida waterways and the Gulf of Mexico, where manatees mainly reside. And unfortunately, because of this, manatee abundance and the population growth rate have both been found to be directly negatively impacted by these red tides. So as you can see, these red tides are massive algae blooms. So the anthropogenic causes for red tides, this can be owed to climate change because the global temperatures have risen, and this has increased the rate of algae blooms because the algae that produces these red tides thrives in this warm marine environment. So as the global temperatures have risen, the ocean temperatures have risen, and of course, the algae blooms have also increased as a result of this. And the Southwest is really expected to experience both moderate and intense red tides with a lot more frequency in the future. And as these global temperatures rise, the rate of these red tides will increase and manatee mortality rates will just continue to go up. So the American manatees have also been found to have very low rates of genetic diversity, and this acts as another conservation threat. So high rates of genetic diversity are essential for species that are negatively impacted by anthropogenic activity. And this is because species that have low rates of genetic diversity are often not able to adapt fast enough to the rapid environmental changes that are currently coming because of climate change. And low genetic diversity has also resulted in inbreeding because of the lowered variation among the population. And inbreeding can also really negatively impact the long-term survival of the species. So overall, low genetic diversity has been found to reduce the American manatees' survival rate, reproduction, fitness, as well as their population abundance. So this is just an example of some manatees that are living with each other. So the anthropogenic causes for low genetic diversity, unfortunately, habitat loss and fragmentation have both contributed to lower genetic diversity because it makes the areas in which manatees can live much less available. So the areas in which they can live and they can mate to reproduce more manatees has lowered. So because of this, their genetic diversity has also decreased. Boating and fishing has also lowered the genetic diversity of manatees by, again, reducing their population size and decreasing the variation that is possible amongst their genes. So the reduction in the amount of available mates that manatees have because of these lowering population rates have lowered the American manatee's chance of survival. And climate change also plays a role in lowering the genetic diversity for American manatees because the manatees are very susceptible to diseases that are cold related because they are so dependent on having access to clean, warm water in the winter. And because the access to this is decreasing, their survival rate is again decreasing, and this is lowering their genetic diversity. Another conservation threat that they're facing, like I discussed a little bit before, is habitat loss and fragmentation. And this happens when manatees' marine environment are threatened and it's a lot more hard for them to access. And this results in the reduction of the availability of fresh water, and also the water quality is detrimentally impacted. And both of these things have great impacts on the chance that manatees have to survive. So one major thing that's an issue is the building of these boardwalks. So boardwalks are built along waterways and also in waterways, and they completely bifurcate waterways and make it really hard for all marine life to function because it has this massive split, or there is human activity right along the shore. So the developing of this kind of human infrastructure with boardwalks, buildings, and shopping centers have meant that a lot of the habitat has been lost, replaced, and fragmented or altered by this human activity. And also the building of pipes and dams are really harmful to manatees because manatees can become trapped in these man-made dams and pipes. And this isolation from clean, fresh water, from food, and from other manatees can result in their death, unfortunately. Boardwalks also just generally produce a lot of pollution. As you can see here, they produce light pollution and they produce sound pollution. So this also contributes to just confusion that manatees face, which is really unfortunate. But thankfully, there has been a long history of conservation efforts. So the American manatee has been included in the endangered species list, and it has also been protected by the United States Fish and Wildlife Services, both since 1967. And the US Fish and Wildlife Services have enacted multiple objectives and recovery plans since the beginning of the 2000s. An example of this is the Florida Manatee Recovery Program, which was put in place in 2001. And this was done to help add additional protection to their habitat. Some other conservation efforts that are occurring are what's happening in the Mote Marine Lab. So since 1998, there are multiple teams of scientists, and they have been conducting research on 2 resident manatees. And they've been doing research looking into essentially how manatees thrive, what conditions best serve them and suit them, and ways in which they can be helped. So because of this, the data that they have produced has helped to yield very useful results, which with positive implications for their conservation and management, because the data that's been produced has helped to inform scientists. And being informed is really one of the best things to help conservation and species management. So this is an example of a group of people that are working together to help manatees. Besides just governmental organizations, there are also NGOs and just volunteer groups that have been created that aren't even not-for-profit, but just general groups of people like on Facebook that come together to assist in manatee rescues. And as a result of these conservation efforts, it has been proven that manatee populations have thankfully been positively impacted by these conservation efforts. So as of 2012, it's really wonderful, after doing extensive research on these manatee populations for like almost 40 years, it was discovered that the conservation threats that the American manatees were once thought to be facing were not as severe as previously believed. And scientists think that this can either be owed to the success of conservation efforts or the knowledge of demographic effects of the manatees' threats that they're facing has increased, or it can be owed to both of these things. So again, here's another group of people that come together to help manatees. And by using this data that the studies have generated, conservation efforts are being rethought. So changes are being made to the core biological model regarding manatee conservation, and the revisions that are being made show that manatee conservation efforts have been successful, as I just mentioned, and the chance of manatee populations falling below 500 adults, so that's like about the point of no return for their species. So the chance of this happening by the year 2165 is thought to only be 0.92%. And this is really, really promising for the future of manatee populations and other charismatic aquatic megafauna that are facing conservation threats like seals and sea lions. Because if these same conservation methods can be implemented in the future, then hopefully all of their species management and conservation can be positively impacted. So I'm just going to leave us all with this picture of a manatee. Does anyone have any questions?
Oh, that was terrific. Well done, Mina.
Thank
Any questions
you.
on manatees? So it's good to have a positive story here in the face of all these changes. It seems awareness, and
Yes.
all those efforts, the outreach efforts and whatnot are really kicking in. Well done. That was fabulous. Okay.
Thank you. I'll just go ahead and stop sharing.
I don't know. I don't see Naomi on right now. So Derek, are you good to present?
Yes, I should be. Give me 1 second. Gotta pull this up.
So while we're waiting, if you guys have forgotten at any point to drop anything into the Dropbox, so I think I had sent out some personal messages, but make sure you go back and check your article handouts 1, 2, and 3. I think I have all the annoteds. I may not have these, so don't forget these. I know a lot of you were kind of working maybe right up to the last minute. Make sure you drop them in the Dropbox because that's where my grading will occur.
All right, share this. Should be good. You guys see that?
Yep.
Okay. Get all set here. Turn this on. Okay, so I was presenting on, my topic was the black rhino. Conservation efforts for these guys have done pretty well in the last year, but some background information first. So currently in Africa, there's 2 species of rhinos, the black rhino and the white rhino. So the black rhino, Diceras bicornis, the one that is critically endangered and needs the most immediate attention. Their male and females are about the same size, around 2,000 pounds. Adult rhinos, 5 feet high at shoulder at shoulder and 12 feet long. They have pretty long lifespans. They can live anywhere between 35 to 50 years. The black rhino is slightly smaller than the white rhino, and you can see in this little picture for scale between the 2 of them. So you're going to notice the white rhino is just a little bit fatter and wider. The big difference though is in the face. You can see the black rhino has this kind of pointed nose, this hooked upper lip, whereas the white rhino has more of a square lawnmower jaw, I guess is it put it. And there's also, the white rhino has a little bit longer forehead, more long floppy ears. Black rhino has a little bit shorter ears. Now the hooked and the square lips, that comes into play when we're talking about how they eat. So the white rhinos are going to be a little bit more grazers, where the black rhinos consume shrubs, thorny bushes, any like woody type material that can be found around these like arid environments that they live in southeastern Africa. The black rhinos are critically endangered, whereas the white rhinos are doing a little better. I think they have like a slight concern of endangerment, but their numbers are a little bit better. The World Wildlife Fund put the black rhinos numbers at 5,600. So they're doing a little bit better than they have in the past, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But they are still critically endangered, and there is still a big risk of these guys going out of existence. So across the years, this is a pretty cool graph from the International Rhino Foundation. You can see that in the mid to late 1900s, rhino populations just dropped. Drastic change. This is due to, stuff like poaching, stuff like that. In 2016, they finally ended up being classified as critically endangered, which gains them protections and conservation efforts and stuff like that. In the late 80s, early 90s, you can see that big dot right in the center in the middle of the graph. Their population was at the lowest in the last 50 years. It's just decimated populations. But again, they're on the rise a little bit, so they're doing a little bit better now from conservation efforts. You can see historic. So this is a really interesting little visual here. That entire shaded area of Africa was their historic range. Now they're only they're just these little dots, right? So it spans from Namibia up to Kenya on the eastern coast, crossing places like Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Botswana. It's pretty much they're just the lower eastern side of Africa now compared to a larger portion. You get upper middle Africa, and this is due to extreme, very severe poaching. Habitat loss is one of the couple of key factors that destroyed these populations. And this is another good one. So you have Diceros bicornis, the black rhino, but there's also a couple subpopulations. So you have the minor bicornis mckaley, the long pips, the western black rhino. That one is extinct in the wild now. I think it's actually just extinct. There's no more of that subpopulation. So everything across middle Africa, like you saw, if I can go back real quick, this entire area up here in the middle of Africa, that was all inhabited by the western black rhino. That's now completely extinct. And this really interesting graph that's tied right into in next to this, you can see all these countries like Angola, Cameroon, Chad that had rhinos. All their populations are at 0 now, and these dashed lines these are really the only ones. So this is Tanzania, Botswana, Zimbabwe. These are where rhinos live now, but their populations did also take a massive hit in the late 70s, early 80s. So a couple threats that caused these rhino populations to decline so drastically. Poaching is the big one. That's what most of their conservation efforts are focused around, is kind of mitigating that effect and passing legislation and international law to prohibit the trade of rhinos for their horns that are used in traditional medicines in Asia and Southern Asia. Couple ways to stop this, or I guess the main way to stop this is their horn modifications. So taking away the only thing that these poachers are really after, so that can be cutting off the horns of rhino, like in this picture over here. Another good practice that has been used that you see on other elephants with horn or other animals with horns like elephants is dyeing horns, so making them unusable or less valuable than just regular pure rhino horns. On top of that, climate change and disease, also big factors of declining populations. So with climate change, we see less water and food that is available for these rhinos to eat and drink. Less food, more deaths, lower birth rates. It's kind of a downward spiral, that negative feedback loop that can affect these rhinos huge. And disease, so tick-borne diseases, babiosis, can kill rhinos as well. And this disease, especially the tick-borne ones, can kind of compound with climate change. So you have rhinos that get these diseases, and since there's less food, they're a little bit more malnourished. They're not as strong as they would be. So the disease compounds that and makes the lowers birth rates and more deaths even faster than it normally would with just climate change alone. And these are just a couple good pictures of the rhino conservation effects, like in action. So you can see, you know, sedated rhinos, they're taking measurements of horns, they're tracking to make any changes, releasing them back into the wild. So this is the big push for rhino conservation. Translocation, capturing rhinos, sedating them, transporting them to areas that have been deemed in need and critical need of rhino population infusion, and then release and monitor. So after these rhinos have been released into these reserves and controlled areas, they're going to track the rhinos, make sure that they aren't getting into any squabbles with other rhinos. They're very territorial animals. I think this is a pretty cool picture. It looks interesting. They're just strung up by their ankles, you know, blinded. I'm sure they're passed out, you know, on all sedated, but they transport them by helicopter a lot of times. So they're just going to drop them wherever they need them. Translocation, it's a good strategy. It's most effective in small reserve sizes with a smaller population. That way you see a little bit less chance of rhinos interacting with other territorial rhinos, especially the bulls. Successful translocation leads to sustainable development, keeps populations healthy. And as I said, precautions need to be taken as not to cause turf wars between bulls. They're very territorial. So it showed that reserve sizes of 11,500 hectares are the golden zone of rhino translocation. Like that's where you want to have at least that. Anything below that, you're going to run into problems with rhinos either kind of moving towards boundaries that they shouldn't be moving towards, or you're going to see them start to fight with other rhinos in that area. And again, the objective of translocation really is to preserve genetic variability. So this species has seen a loss of 69% of its genetic variability. And that's, you know, you got to preserve the species without homogenizing it. So while you want to infuse rhino populations across state boundaries in Africa, you don't want to do it with you don't want to inject these rhinos in and also jeopardize the variability of the entire population. So you want to do it and keep the variability instead of blending the entire population into one homogeneous mass. And I just have a really quick NPR list, and I thought this was pretty cool. It talks about 2 rhinos that died during translocation, but it also is really great at just hitting the key points of translocation and how to be successful with it. Just let me know if you guys can't hear this. All right, it is playing. Can you hear that?
I can't.
No.
You can't. Okay, how do I fix this?
Do you have it so you're sharing the sound?
We can check.
Maybe include it in the chat and then I can play it on mine.
Yes, that could also work. So I just send you the link.
Okay.
Chat.
Hey, NPR.
Can you hear it on mine?
Finding their sound
Yes.
to newlyweds confronting the pandemic. StoryCorps is here to share special moments of connection. Click below to hear a selection of recent stories. Support for NPR One and StoryCorps come from Subaru.
Gotta have the ad, I
It makes
guess.
it
Sorry.
a Subaru.
No, it's fine.
Okay, here we go.
And in what feels like a sad irony, 8 endangered black rhinos have died after being moved to a new wildlife reserve in Kenya as a way of protecting them. A preliminary investigation is pointing to too much salt in the water at their new home. NPR's Shannon Van Zandt reports.
The black rhinos were among 11 being taken from Kenya's capital and Lake Nakuru National Park to Tsavo East National Park. Save the Rhinos Kathy Dean says the relocation of endangered species can help prevent their extinction, but that the process, called translocation, is delicate and risky.
If you are intending to capture and crate and move an animal and release it somewhere else, it's going to be under sedation, under heavy sedation at the beginning and the end of the process, and then probably sedated at some level while it's in transit.
The animals then have to adjust to their new environment.
The spaces available to wildlife, including rhinos, are shrinking, and you can't simply leave wildlife to get on with it. You've actually got to proactively manage your populations, whether that's for genetic diversity or to relieve overcrowded areas or to create new populations. And a key part of that is being able to do translocation, but we have to find out what's gone wrong so that these mistakes are never repeated.
Wildlife officials were hoping a new sanctuary in Tsavo East National Park would serve as a breeding ground. Dean says there used to be thousands of black rhinos in Kenya. Now the numbers are in the hundreds. Rhino numbers have dropped dramatically in recent years because of targeting by poachers who want the rhino's horns, and because of demand in Asia, where the horns are used in some medicines and displayed as symbols of status and wealth. Kenya's government says it has suspended the transportation of black rhinos and that there will be an independent investigation of the rhinos' deaths. Shannon Van Sant.
Yeah, so that's just a really good little snippet from NPR talking about translocation, how it can work, how it can fail. And I mean, unfortunately, 2 of the rhinos died due to, it seems like negligence, but I don't know. Oh, gotta get back on here. Okay. So real quickly, the future of the black rhino population. So effective conservation done on small scale reserves, taken one step at a time and adjusted according to the population's needs. Two-pronged approaches, really targeting the rhino's habitat and the people that live in the habitat. So that's going to include people, poachers, along with conservation efforts, making sure that they can't take rhinos anymore, especially the black rhinos, and population health. So managing genetic diversity through translocation, keeping different rhino populations unique, and higher population numbers in the future. That means that there is, again, an increased risk of poaching. So we have to think about if rhino populations do start to take off again, as they're steadily on the rise, not very much, but if they do reach big numbers again, make sure that it doesn't fall into that same loop of poaching and destroying the population again. And overall, between 2012, 2018, a small but positive growth rate of 2.5. We've seen increase of a little under 1,000 rhinos in Africa. And that is it.
Awesome. So thorough. You guys are doing great presentations. You're like the rhino expert, Derek. Good stuff. All right. Naomi, are you good to share?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Can you guys see it?
Yep. You might need to speak a little louder.
Oh, okay. So I did, my paper was about conservation in the Adirondacks. And so I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but the Adirondack Park is about 6 million acres. Has what's called the blue line around it, which is basically designated the protected area. 43% of it is currently state land, but because the entire area is designated for protection, for conservation, the remaining private land is heavily regulated. So basically the whole thing is basically set aside for conservation. So it was established under old conservation principles, but I'm going to talk about whether this has worked and how new conservation ideas have been kind of integrated and things that may need to change. So, like I said, it was established under.
Uh-oh. I think we lost your audio, Naomi. Naomi, we can't hear you anymore. I'm gonna send her a chat, you guys. She may need to log back on, log back out. Hannah, are you ready to go if we have to see if she's good to go in the end?
Yeah, I'm all set.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, maybe she's having trouble connecting.
Yeah, looks like it. Okay, in the essence of time, why don't you hop on and then we'll try and bring her in when you're done, Hannah. Or Naomi, are you back on?
Yeah, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah. Do you want to start again or do you want Hannah to go next?
I can go if
Yeah, if your internet's stable, go for it.
where was I?
There we go.
Okay. So the early 19th century had an abundance of land, especially in the United States. There was this perception that human development is unstoppable. So that's the concept of like manifest destiny. We're gonna reach the coast and move on to islands and all this. So there was this idea of like unstoppable resources. So towards the end of the 20th century, that led to the rise of conservationists realizing that with this mindset, we're not living compatibly with nature. So like with Gifford Pinchot, I forget the name of the book, but he pushed that idea. And so as we're settling and taking resources everywhere we find, we need to set aside areas as designated wilderness. So this philosophy of old conservation pushed for segments of land designated as protected areas. So new conservation is this more modern idea that states that conservation needs to be also considered in private areas because A, there's just not enough protected space. Animals need the space we live in as well. And we also need to learn how to live compatibly with nature. We're part of the environment since we live in it. So we have a responsibility to live compatibly with it. And new conservation tries to work closer with the interests of local people and get them involved in conservation of their own land. Aldo Leopold was big in pushing this. So in a way, the Adirondacks have kind of used new conservation principles by necessity because there's a lot of private land in the area. That wasn't the goal. So early 19th century, the Adirondacks were highly exploited. The reason for that was basically the ruggedness of the land. The land was like very cheap because only logging companies would want to use it. They could clear cut it, and then the land would go back to the state, and it was basically worthless at that time. There were some like clubs or camps for richer people. It was advertised as like a summer home to hunt and fish, and there were a few like poorer people of lower income, but basically logging companies clearing the land. So they would clear cut. A lot of times fire would come to it. So a lot of the land was damaged. There was also tanning using the hemlock. So the lower image, you can see one of the towns for that. And mining, not just iron, but a lot of iron in the area, and kind of disrupted the area.
Before you advance, Naomi, go back for a sec. You guys, do you see how in the bottom picture there's 1, 2, 3, 4 buildings that look kind of weird, and then there's 2 normal looking ones in the back? Those are actually piles of bark that have been removed from trees that'll be, processed, heated in water to remove some of the tannins that be used to mold leather, right? So this was there's a couple big towns. Tannersville is one, but I think was it Johnsville? Do you remember? Jordan Falls, obviously.
Yeah, this was Jordan Falls. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple as you pass Warrensburg. Gloversville is another one, right? They used to make gloves, so they would take the bark, they would extract those tannins through heat and water and whatnot, and then they would use that to mold and kind of massage the leather. But that's just fascinating, the amount of bark that is like in the form of a house back there. Okay, go ahead.
Right. And I also came across pictures of like the stripped logs. So it was very wasteful. Just taking
Yeah.
the bark, the wood's not really good for much of anything, and then leaving that there. And I mean, there's other ways to tan as well. So it was very wasteful, but that's just shows the perception of the time that we have all this. Look, it's all here. Like we're never gonna run out, except we will. So that led to, oh, my slide's kind of messed up. But anyways, that led to the establishment of a state park. So like I said, like old conservation principles led to this desire to establish national and state parks in general. So Theodore Roosevelt was really big in pushing this. His family had a camp in the Adirondacks, and he had spent a lot of time hunting. So he was very important in pushing this. And other people within the state wanted a park to protect the area, as they see like this is one of the last sections of wilderness in New York State, and it's just being destroyed. So it's kind of like a last haven where we can find these resources. And some of the conservation was because people were like, hey, where are we going to go to hunt and like log and stuff like that. So some of it was utilitarian, but still, like, this is how it came about. But more specifically for the area, there was this big concern that the Hudson River, there was going to be washout because of the logging with destroying the roots of like the trees coming down. They would no longer prevent erosion. So that would influence trade, as obviously that's like a big waterway connected with Lake Champlain and all that. So that was one of the major reasons that the state was like, oh, we need to step in. But also preserving like the pristine nature of the land. So I don't know how much the state was, like how much this influenced the state's decision. But obviously we all know the Trudeau Institute over in Saranac Lake. So James Trudeau had come up in sometime in the 19th century, I forget, and had found relief from his illness. So he set up that as like curing of tuberculosis and like also other diseases. He was like, oh, this works. Like you can come and find relief by the fresh air and like the wilderness, and like this is very healthy. So we're getting that as well. One thing that I found like was a negative effect of old conservation. So a lot of the camps and whatnot of the like these richer people that would come up, they wanted the establishment of a park to increase the value of their own land. So like make it designated wilderness rather than settled, and this would make their areas a more ideal place to travel. So I found one source that talked about how like this led to the poorer folks starting fires all over their sections of land. So I guess like acres upon acres were burned as a result of this. So this is one of the failures of old conservation, because obviously this is destroying habitat as they're not working with some of these other people. But yeah, that's a side note kind of. But so that was one of the impetus to get a park. And the last reason was that a lot of the land is going to the state anyways, but it's in severely damaged condition by that point. As the loggers already cut it, they wouldn't pay their taxes on it and it would revert to the state. So the state would have to wait until it recovered to do anything with it. So rather than that, they decided to just buy the land as it was, since the prices were low, and they could log it to some extent themselves or just keep it as protected area. And also that would lead to not having to deal with these forest fires that were created by piles of brush that were left over from the logging. So the state would have to deal with it, but it was like it shouldn't have been their problem because the loggers were creating this issue. So they decided that if they took it themselves, if there was logging done, it would be sustainable, not causing these huge fires. So my thesis in the paper was that with the goal of keeping land in the park, public and private, as pristine as possible, the state began to put in place laws for conservation under old conservation principles, some of which were successful. The restoration of the land from its exploited state, obviously, that changed a lot, an increase in wildlife and lowered pollution, but there also were several issues that arose, impacts from the outside failure to work with private landowners within the park. So new conservation kind of answers these problems. The initial conservation goals of the state were to make the whole area state land, and it's supposed to be forever wild, the whole thing. Obviously that didn't work out. The land became too expensive for them to buy, so 57% ended up being private land, but that was their initial goal. And to restore the acquired land, this was a success, an example of old conservation success, to just preserve it.
Oh, we lost your audio again, Naomi.
Oh.
Sorry, guys.
Am I back?
Yep, you're back.
Okay. Now my PowerPoint's not working. Come on. Okay, my computer's freaking out. Hang on 1 second. Okay, try this again.
Yep, we're back.
Okay, so this is just showing how the park expanded over the years as the state continued to buy land. Obviously, within that, there are sections of private land, but that was the growth over the 19th and 20th centuries. The bold line is the boundary. So as I said, private land became in the way of having an entirely public state park. So 57% of it is now private. Land prices increased rapidly as a result of new interest in the park. So the state was not able to buy all the land that they had planned. As a result of this, they decided to just regulate the area so that it would still be useful to conservation. Then over the 50s and 60s, I-87 was put in, much to the chagrin of conservationists, and that increased tourism and the popularity of living in the Adirondacks. So state officials realized that this was making the area crowded, and that's obviously not aligning well with this forever wild ideal. So they established the Adirondack Park Agency, the APA, to prevent too much development. So this was established under old conservation principles to prevent the Adirondacks from becoming too developed. Some of their goals I found were not quite consistent with old conservation. So they wanted to prevent development, but at the same time, they realized they had this challenge with economics in the area. So they're like, oh, well, this is also providing a tourism base for economics. So I think even from the beginning, they kind of realized this isn't really going to work out exactly as we thought. But they established their zoning regulations and the plan to establish that. So the conservation results as a result of their work. Oh, I talked about 3 different things: wildlife, pollution, and like, is this a sustainable model for conservation?
I want to try and wrap up in like, 2 to 3 minutes. We're short on time.
Okay. So general wildlife health. This is a success for old conservation. Many populations are healthy, but still need management. So the black bear, you can see on there, I know there's a bear steward right now. They still have to kind of regulate the population. White-tailed deer. So those are healthy populations that still need management. Several populations that were struggling have been increased, such as the moose and the bald eagle. I had a graph, it's kind of blurry, but the graph on the left shows the bald eagle increase, and the chart on the right shows the number of moose deaths. So unfortunately have risen, but that also shows how the numbers themselves have increased. So these are increasing populations. One species that I looked into a lot as an indicator species is the loon. So because it's a highly specialized species, it does not adapt well to pollution, habitat loss, or disturbance. So this species current population numbers are okay, but they're struggling a lot with acid deposition, mercury in the water, and with habitat disturbance by recreationists. So the acid deposition decreases their prey availability and forces them to have to move around. So as a case selected species, failure of several of the young to survive has a significant effect on their population. So there's about 17% of them are highly affected by pollution. So that shows that like they're still affected even in this area that's supposed to be wilderness, but they're doing okay. So, and then this is not a failure exactly, but room for improvement. Some wildlife which used to live here no longer do. They were pushed out by hunting and human development effect on the forest. So like thin forest does not sustain these animals as much as an untouched wilderness. So old conservation techniques would probably be ideal for these species, but we need to find ways to integrate them into areas where humans are. So the Adirondacks is a good place to start, as it's divided between private and public state land. And then I talked about the results of acid rain in the area and pollution. So even in a remote area like this, the effects of pollution are felt from the outside, from industrial areas. So acid deposition results in acidic compounds like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide in the area. As you can see, the sulfur deposition on the right, it has been helped by the Clean Air Act amendment, but nitrogen oxide has not been affected. Unfortunately, it still remains high. These acid levels also have a correlation with mercury levels. So, and that is known to kill off amphibians and like other aquatic species. So just wrapping up, there are also challenges if we would like to use this as a model. Is it sustainable or not? The issues with that are tourism development, obviously, like this is making it more developed, and that this is a challenge to it as a wilderness area. Economic development, that's kind of been hindered. And we're kind of like struggling with what is the goal of this. People have different perceptions of what success is. So there's that. And then my conclusion is that so conservation goals have been achieved, but success is defined differently by some people as opposed to others. And so new conservation can help this be more successful. I think to be sustainable, new conservation, using new conservation, we can focus more on local needs. So we're using this as a sustainable model instead of just like, oh, here's one little haven, like can we replicate this other places? Also, though, to be effective, I think we need to integrate new conservation in other places. So like the whole thing with pollution, that's coming from outside, not just in our area. So these are outside influences coming in and hurting this area. So for the Adirondacks to be a success in conservation, some of these things outside also need to change. So new conservation can help there as well. So just kind of wrapping up.
Good stuff. Excellent job, Naomi. Sorry about your technical issues, but such good nuggets of our history where we live. So I appreciate you sharing that topic with us. Great job. So Hannah, we're on to you. Kelp. Kelp has been in the news a lot recently.
I've definitely noticed. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, so I did my presentation, my project on, oh, 1 second. Sorry. On the collapse of the kelp and undersea forests in decline. Kelp are highly diverse and structurally functional, comprising of primarily brown algae in the order Limonariales, which produce the largest biogenetic structure in the marine benthic systems. Kelp span approximately 1/4 of the world's coastlines and are a foundational species that vertebrates and invertebrates rely on to sustain their own well-being and maintain long-term populations. The high productivity of kelp forest provides abundant food sources for organisms such as fish, urchins, small crustaceans, and snails. As much as 80% of local productions ends up as drift kelp, which is a primary food source for many habitats. Kelp forests magnify secondary production by supporting complex food webs in coastal zones. My thesis was that kelp are susceptible to a variety of natural and anthropogenic factors that make them vulnerable to the disappearance and extinction of many species necessary for our coastlines. Factors such as overfishing leads to a rise of invasives, anthropogenic climate change leads to the risk of turfs, and national and local economies rely on kelp forests to boost their economies and keep tourists engaged. Kelp forest life history and ecology. Kelp forests, despite their low taxonomic diversity, dominate shallow rocky coasts of the world's cold water marine habitats. Limenaria species are found in many parts of the world and dominate both the Atlantic coast as well as those of China and Japan. Macrocystis pyrifera, giant kelp, can grow up to 45 meters long and dominate the west coasts of North and South America. Macrocystis can essentially be considered a weed for how quick it is to colonize surfaces within a wide range of environmental conditions. Kelp contain trumpet hyphae cells that allow them to attain their great size, and the morphology of the adult species decides where the kelp fronds begin to grow, either near the benthos, intermediate depths, or float on the surface. This is a kelp distribution map. You can see Macrocystis and Laminaria occupy different parts of the world, but the giant kelp forest that we typically see in California is dominated by Macrocystis. And this is the kelp life cycle. There are two stages that brown algae exist in. First, as spores, which are released from the parent as male or female plants that will make sperm or eggs. And these fertilize to form the second stage as the mature plant. And then seen in the previous slide, the mature plant morphology determines where kelp will sort of land on in the parts of the ocean. Overfishing in kelp forests. Overfishing in kelp communities leads to the degradation of the trophic structure of the ecosystem and has begun to lead to the global decline of kelp forests. Sea otters are important predators in limiting grazing species, sea urchin populations, but were hunted near extinction in the 18th and 19th centuries. In one sea otter population in the Alaskan Aleutian Islands, populations declined by 90% since 1990, leading to a reverse cascade in kelp communities, inviting sea urchin suppression. Atlantic cod and other large fish were apex predators of persistent sea urchins until mechanized fishing technology in the 1920s led to the rapid decline of large fish predators. Spiny lobsters were once a principal species of preying on sea urchins, but has been overfished in marine protected areas. This graph here shows changes in sea otter abundance over time. And as you can see, as the sea otters decline, the sea urchin biomass goes way up, as you can see in the second part of this graph right here. And the total kelp density also declines by a very large margin. Climate change when it comes to kelp. So kelp thrive in colder temperate water, and the onset of marine heat waves, or MHWS, with an average of 50% more registered per year, make it an increasing threat to the kelp. Periodic warming events such as El Nino generates warm, nutrient-poor water and stronger storms that displace kelp forests. The recovery of damaged plants by storms is inhibited by the water associated with El Nino, and drift algae becomes limited during storms, and urchins tend to forage on attached plants, inhibiting the growth and survival of remaining kelp even more. Along the coast of Western Australia during an extreme MHW in 2010 to 2011, an MHW wiped out kelp forests and replaced turfs along 100 kilometers of coast, and there was a 400% increase of grazing by tropical herbivores. So the herbivores include like tropical fish and things like that. This is what a turf is. It's basically turf algae is what kelp forests become when it's overgrazed by sea urchins, other tropical herbivores like fish. It's just total degradation of the kelp forest, and it's very hard for kelp to bounce back from turf barrens. This is a picture of urchins grazing in kelp beds. They come by like very enormous numbers, so it's very hard for kelp to bounce back. Oh, whoops. ecoservices. In northern Chile, the economic valuation of kelp beds is similar to 540 million US dollars, and kelp harvesting represents 75% of the total. The destruction of kelp due to overexploitation means an economic loss of millions. Fisheries associated with kelp in Chile rely on kelp for numerous fish, mollusk, and invertebrate populations. In the UK and Ireland's economy, coastal marine biodiversity contribute 11 billion pounds to the economy and help maintain local fisheries by maintaining fish stock and supporting ecosystem structure. Kelp support local economies by supplementing recreational activities like snorkeling, scuba diving, free diving, kayaking, and wildlife watching. Help provide a resource as a biogenetic structure in coastal zones similar to salt marshes and mangroves and alleviate flood and storm damage. Some take homes are that kelp are highly productive, vital foundation species to our global coastline ecosystems that are at risk for devastation due to a number of factors. Overfishing of keystone predators has led to the onset of invasive species that decimate populations and can lead to barren turf lands. Climate change and MHWs pose a greater threat as anthropogenic facilitation leads to the collapse of kelp faster, and future research must focus on ways to limit invasives from decimating populations and protecting kelp from anthropogenic climate change.
Awesome.
And photo references.
Terrific. Great job. Hannah, you're probably going to need more time than 5 minutes for your other presentation. So maybe we'll try and sneak that in on Thursday if that works, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well done, you guys. That was fabulous. And I sent Hannah a link maybe yesterday, I think it was. So in the news, I know they're doing some new work with kelp. So they're kind of setting buoys that are biodegradable buoys out in the ocean. They're peppering them with like little kelp seedlings. And then they're letting them grow into these massive, floating forests of kelp that are meant to be like, remember we talked in general ecology about geoengineering type stuff, dropping the iron filings to ramp up those algae blooms to pull in the carbon dioxide. Now imagine you have, and I believe it wasn't like it was a foam buoy or anything. It was something totally natural, biodegradable that you could then pepper with these, kelp that are going to grow into these massive forests, pull in that carbon dioxide, which, obviously is going to be a help. And then ultimately over time, those buoys break down and they sink. The kelp will sink down to kind of where they need to be, forming this carbon sink, which I think is just a fabulous idea. It's really cool to see engineering like really work in the way that it should to try and make positive changes. So anyway, I know Naomi jumped in a little later, maybe others did too, just wanting to remind you guys of the final batch of assignments and stuff. I sent an email yesterday just trying to tie up the loose ends. I think I've got almost all peer reviews in, and they have been great. I've scored the ones that I have seen. So if you forgot to send an email, please do send that email so I know you've done it. The final paper revisions, I'm going to give you again as much time, just like on the final, as much time as I possibly can, because I know you guys are busy and have lots of other things too. So I'd like the final papers revised on your research that you just have presented by the end of next week. So not this week, but the end of finals week, that Friday. If you've got it done earlier, drop it in. So that way I'm not as overwhelmed. I'm going to be getting your test on Thursday and your papers on Friday. So that's a lot of stuff at the very end. So if you do have it done and it's revised, drop it in the Dropbox. That alleviates some of the stress for me at the end of the semester. So papers due next Friday, exam you have posted and it's ready for you to go and work your way through until the end of our finals period, which is Thursday at 2:20. So for Naomi and anybody else who joined late, if you go down to the very bottom, this final exam, and you click on it, it's open-ended in terms of time. You can come back to it any time that you want. There's many that are open-ended essay questions, but they're not meant to be like, 15 pages long. They're meant to be a few sentence responses. You don't have to go crazy with it. And they're a mix, like we showed earlier, they're a mix of, I didn't mean to do that, of multiple choice and and other types of essay questions and so on. So a lot of it's going to derive from material we've covered already, from chapters from the Kariba textbook, from articles that we've read, from slides that I've covered. It's open book. You can take your time with it, go back to things. Just don't want you working in pairs or a group or anything like that. So some are going to be multiple choice. This one was an exciting one I heard this morning. I don't know if anybody else heard it. It's a 3-minute NPR clip. I'm hoping some of them are a little more interactive for you to just kind of quick listen or go back and listen. There was a guy that was arrested in New York City. He took all these hair curlers. I'm so excited because it was a crazy story. All these hair curlers. He was over in Guyana, his home country. He stuffed finches, I believe they were finches, into each of these hair curlers, put them in his jacket, and then flew over to New York City because this is what they do back home, is they put them in cages and let them sing it out. Whoever sings the longest wins. It's kind of like a dog fight type thing. But he was arrested. And so I wanted you guys to kind of listen to that because I was just fascinated by this story and make some comments. So there's some things that, you'll have to, reflect on a piece or, go back to what we learned. Others, again, are going to be, a little bit quicker and easier to answer. So, you can go and answer the easier ones, look at all of them, get a sense of what you need to go back to and take your time with it. So again, that's at the very bottom of our pages. And I've mentioned to you guys, I've put sprinkled hints in those ones that are a little bit bigger. The essay questions. I don't know why it's taken so long to get back here. But I wanted to show you that if you go to the syllabus, and this is what I alluded to earlier, if you go to the syllabus and you go to our daily schedule in the syllabus, you'll notice everywhere in blue, chapter, those are the Kariba texts, and you can find them in the overview page. If you click on that section in Moodle, they're going to be hyperlinked in there. So you could always go back and access them. You just need to figure out where they are. So all of these are in the questioning norms section. This one is going to be in the habitat loss section. This one is going to be in the invaders section. Okay, so I wanted you to know where they were. You can always go back and reflect on those pieces as you're answering those questions. Okay, sound good?
Yeah.
All right.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'll see you guys on Thursday for our final batch. Good work
Thanks.
today.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Professor,
Yeah,
I just wanted to make sure that the email that I sent you with Devin's
yeah, I think I got it.
that it was correct.
Yeah, I think I got it. And let me open it up and check. Looks great. Thank you. I can open it.
Okay, great. Are the edits in there?
I think so. When I opened it, I saw some commentary. I'm just going to do a full download right now.
Okay, I just want to make sure that I did it right.
Yeah, I don't have a fancy Mac. Unfortunately, they don't have like a built-in plugin for us to open all those file types, which is silly.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
There's like 30% of you guys, I feel like, have Macs. Yep, I've got all your little bubbles on the side. Looks
Okay,
perfect.
great.
Thank you, Mina. And
Perfect.
again, great job today.
Thank you so much. All right, have a
Alrighty.
great day.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Bye.